Elias was a cobbler through and through. His small workshop, nestled on a quiet side street in the town of Oakhaven, was his entire world. Sunlight, filtered through dusty window panes, illuminated the organized chaos within. Scraps of leather in every shade of brown imaginable lay piled on shelves, alongside stacks of worn-out boots awaiting his skilled hands. The air hung thick with the rich, comforting smells of tanned hide, beeswax polish, and the faint, metallic tang of his tools. It was a symphony of scents only a true craftsman could appreciate. Elias wasn't just a cobbler, he was an artist. He didn't simply mend shoes, he breathed new life into them. Each stitch was placed with care, each patch meticulously chosen to match the original leather. He could tell the story of a boot just by looking at it, the miles it had traveled, the terrain it had crossed, the adventures it had witnessed. He saw the value in things that others discarded, the potential for beauty and usefulness in the worn and broken. His hands, gnarled and calloused from years of working with leather, moved with surprising grace. He knew the precise weight of his hammer, the exact angle to hold his awl, the perfect amount of pressure to apply when sewing. He sharpened his own tools, ensuring each one was perfectly honed for its specific task. He took pride in his work, not for the money it brought him, which was often little, but for the satisfaction of creating something lasting and beautiful. He believed in quality, in doing things right, even when no one was watching. He often said, "A well-made shoe is a happy shoe, and a happy shoe makes for a happy journey." And Elias wanted everyone who left his shop to have a happy journey. He put a little bit of himself, his skill, and his care into every single repair. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, painting the dusty street in hues of orange and gold, a figure appeared in the doorway of Elias' shop. It was a traveler, clearly weary from a long journey. His clothes, though once fine, were now rumpled and covered in dust. His face, etched with lines of fatigue, spoke of countless miles walked and hardships endured. But it was his boots that truly told the story. One in particular was in terrible shape, the sole nearly detached, the leather cracked and worn. The traveler leaned heavily on a walking stick as he entered, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He removed his hat, revealing a head of closely cropped, graying hair. He had kind eyes, despite the weariness around them. He looked around the shop, taking in the comforting clutter and the scent of leather. "Good evening," he said, his voice raspy but polite. "I seem to be in need of your services. I've walked a long way and my boot has finally given up on me." Elias, who had been meticulously polishing a pair of riding boots, looked up and smiled. "Welcome, traveler," he said, his voice warm and inviting. Come in, let's have a look at that boot." He gestured to a stool near his workbench. "Please have a seat." A broken boot is a sad thing, but it's nothing that can't be fixed. The traveler gratefully sank onto the stool and carefully removed the offending boot. He held it out to Elias, a sheepish look on his face. "I'm afraid it's in rather poor condition," he said. "I've tried to patch it myself along the way, but it's beyond my skills." Elias took the boot and examined it closely, his fingers tracing the worn leather and the frayed stitching. He could see the traveler's makeshift repairs, clumsy stitches and patches of mismatched leather. He nodded thoughtfully. "It has seen better days," he agreed, "but don't worry, I can fix it. It will take some time and care, but I can make it as good as new." He looked up at the traveler. "You look like you could use a rest. Why don't you find an inn and get some sleep? Come back in the morning and your boot will be ready." Elias set to work as soon as the traveler had left. He carefully examined the boot, noting the areas that needed the most attention. The sole was indeed nearly detached, and the leather had cracked in several places, especially around the heel. The traveler's attempts at repair, while well-intentioned, had only made the situation worse. Elias sighed softly. It was going to be a long night. First, he carefully removed the old, damaged sole, using a sharp knife to separate it from the upper. The leather was stiff and brittle, and he had to be careful not to tear it further. Then, he selected a piece of sturdy, supple leather from his stock, carefully matching the color and texture of the original. He cut a new sole, slightly larger than the old one, and began to shape it, using his hammer and all to mold it to the contours of the boot. Next came the stitching. Elias used a strong, waxed thread and a curved needle to sew the new sole to the upper, carefully following the original stitch lines. His fingers worked with practiced ease, pulling the thread tight and creating a secure, lasting bond. He reinforced the cracked areas with small patches of leather, carefully skiving the edges to create a smooth, seamless finish. As he worked, Elias lost himself in the rhythm of his craft. The click of the hammer, the scrape of the knife, the pull of the thread, these were the sounds of his life, the sounds that brought him peace and satisfaction. He thought about the traveler, wondering where he was going and what his story was. He hoped the repaired boot would serve him well on his journey. Finally, after several hours of painstaking work, Elias was finished. The boot looked almost as good as new. The sole was firmly attached, the cracks were repaired, and the leather gleamed with a fresh coat of polish. He held it up, admiring his handiwork. It was a testament to his skill and dedication, a small act of kindness offered to a stranger. He knew the traveler would be pleased. When the traveler returned the next morning, Elias charged him a pittance for the repair, barely enough to cover the cost of the materials. He simply said, "Safe travels." The traveler, whose name was Thorn, smiled gratefully. He examined the boot, turning it over in his hands, his fingers tracing the smooth leather and the neat stitching. "You've done a remarkable job," he said, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. "I can hardly believe it's the same boot. I don't know how to thank you." Elias shrugged. "It was my pleasure," he said. "A good pair of boots is important for a long journey. I'm just glad I could help." Thorn reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of coins. He counted out a few, offering them to Elias. "Please take this. It's not much, but it's all I have." Elias hesitated. He didn't like to take advantage of people, especially those who were down on their luck. "That's too much," he said. "The materials didn't cost much, and I enjoyed the work. Just give me a small coin, enough for a loaf of bread, and we'll call it even." Thorn insisted on paying a bit more, but Elias stood firm. He only accepted a few small coins, barely enough to cover his expenses. Thorn seemed surprised by his generosity. "You're a kind man, Elias," Thorn said, shaking his hand warmly. "I won't forget this. I promise you I'll repay your kindness someday." He carefully put on the repaired boot, testing its fit. "Perfect," he said. "Thank you again from the bottom of my heart." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "I may be just a weary traveler now," he said, "but things can change. Remember my name, Elias Thorn. You never know when our paths might cross again." With a final nod, he stepped out into the sunlight and disappeared down the street, leaving Elias to his work, wondering if he would ever see the traveler again. Little did he know how profoundly their paths would indeed cross, and how Thorn's promise would one day be fulfilled. For Thorn was not just a simple traveler. He carried a burden of responsibility and a quiet determination that would one day shape the fate of Oakhaven. He was on his way to a new life, a life of service and leadership, a life that would eventually lead him back to the small town and the kind cobbler who had mended his boot. Years drifted by like leaves on the river that flowed gently past Oakhaven. Elias continued his work, his hands growing more gnarled with each passing year, his eyes crinkling at the corners from countless hours spent squinting at leather and thread. He remembered the weary traveler, Thorn, from time to time, wondering if he had ever found his way. The small act of kindness had faded into a pleasant memory, one of many that filled the quiet hours in his workshop. Oakhaven, nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling hills, thrived. The river, a shimmering ribbon of life, was the heart of the town. It provided water for the farms, powered the old mill, and offered a cool respite on hot summer days. Children splashed and played along its banks, fishermen cast their lines, and lovers strolled hand in hand along its grassy edges. The townspeople cherished the river, knowing that their prosperity and well-being were inextricably linked to its health and vitality. Life in Oakhaven was simple but good, filled with the rhythms of nature and the warmth of community. The townsfolk were hardworking and honest, content with their lot and grateful for the blessings they enjoyed. They supported each other through thick and thin, celebrating triumphs and comforting those in times of sorrow. The town was a haven, a place where people felt safe and secure, a place where they could raise their families and live out their days in peace. Elias, with his quiet kindness and unwavering dedication to his craft, was an integral part of the fabric of Oak Haven, a respected member of the community, his small shop a familiar and comforting landmark. He had seen generations of families pass through his doors, mending their shoes, listening to their stories, and offering a word of encouragement when needed. He was more than just a cobbler. He was a friend, a confidant, and a pillar of the town. And he, like everyone else in Oak Haven, depended on the river for his livelihood and his happiness. The river was their lifeblood, the source of their prosperity, and the foundation of their community. The tranquility of Oak Haven was shattered one crisp autumn morning. A group of well-dressed strangers arrived in town, driving gleaming black cars that seemed out of place on the dusty streets. They were representatives of a powerful corporation, Riverbend Enterprises, and they had come with a proposal that would forever change the fate of Oak Haven. They gathered the townspeople in the town square, their faces grim and expectant. Mr. Harding, the corporation's lead negotiator, a man with a slick-back hairstyle and a sharp, calculating gaze, stepped forward. He spoke in a smooth, confident voice, his words carefully chosen to persuade and impress. "My friends," he began, "Riverbend Enterprises has a vision for the future, a vision of progress and prosperity. We believe that Oak Haven has the potential to be much more than it is today." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "We propose to build a dam on the river, a magnificent structure that will generate clean, renewable energy and create countless jobs for the region." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some faces lit up with excitement at the prospect of new jobs and economic growth. Others remained skeptical, their eyes narrowed with suspicion. Elias, standing near the back of the crowd, felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. Mr. Harding continued, painting a rosy picture of the future. He spoke of increased property values, new schools and hospitals, and a higher standard of living for everyone in Oak Haven. He glossed over the potential downsides, minimizing the impact on the environment and the disruption to the town's way of life. "Of course," he conceded, "there will be some sacrifices. The dam will require us to flood a portion of the valley, including some farmland and a few homes. But we will compensate those affected fairly, and the benefits to the community as a whole will far outweigh the costs." As he spoke, Elias looked around at the faces of his neighbors. He saw the hope in some eyes, but he also saw the fear and uncertainty in others. He knew that the river was more than just a source of water and power. It was the lifeblood of their community, the foundation of their identity. He couldn't imagine Oak Haven without it. The thought of the river being dammed, its flow disrupted, its beauty destroyed, filled him with a sense of dread. He knew deep down that this vision of progress was a threat to everything they held dear. The corporation's proposal was not a gift, it was a wolf in sheep's clothing. In the days that followed, Oak Haven was consumed by debate. The townspeople gathered in small groups, arguing and discussing the merits and drawbacks of the dam. Some were swayed by the promise of economic prosperity, envisioning a brighter future for their children. Others remained steadfast in their opposition, determined to protect the river at all costs. Elias, usually a quiet and reserved man, found himself becoming increasingly vocal. He spoke passionately about the importance of the river, not just as a source of water and power, but as a symbol of their community, a part of their heritage. He reminded them of the countless generations who had lived and thrived along its banks, of the stories and memories that were intertwined with its flowing waters. "We cannot let them take our river," he declared at a town meeting, his voice trembling with emotion. "It's more precious than any amount of money. It's our lifeblood, our soul. We must fight to protect it." Inspired by Elias' words, the townspeople began to organize. They formed a Save the River committee, collecting signatures on petitions, writing letters to the local newspaper, and planning a protest march. Elias, despite his age, threw himself into the effort, working tirelessly alongside his neighbors. He helped to create signs and banners, using his leatherworking skills to craft durable and eye-catching displays. He even designed a special emblem for the movement, a stylized image of the river flowing through the valley, surrounded by the words "Oak Haven Forever." The protest march was a resounding success. Hundreds of townspeople, young and old, marched through the streets of Oak Haven, carrying signs and chanting slogans. They marched past the corporation's temporary offices, their voices ringing out in defiance. Mr. Harding and his colleagues watched from the windows, their faces grim. They had underestimated the resolve of the people of Oak Haven. They had thought they could simply buy them off with promises of money and progress. But they were wrong. The people of Oak Haven were not willing to sell their soul. They were willing to fight for their river, for their community, for their way of life. And Elias, the humble cobbler, was leading the charge. He was no longer just a craftsman. He was a champion, a symbol of hope and resistance. He stood tall, his voice strong, his spirit unyielding. He would not let them destroy his town. He would not let them take their river. He would fight until his last breath. The protest march, however successful in raising awareness, was only the beginning of a long and arduous battle. Riverbend Enterprises, with its vast resources and army of lawyers, was not easily deterred. They filed permits, conducted environmental impact studies that conveniently downplayed the negative consequences, and lobbied government officials, pulling every string they could to push the dam project forward. The town of Oak Haven, with its limited resources and lack of legal expertise, found itself outmatched. They hired a young, idealistic lawyer named Sarah Jenkins, fresh out of law school but with a burning passion for justice. Sarah, though inexperienced, was determined to fight for Oak Haven and its river. The legal battle was fought in a series of tense courtroom scenes. Riverbend's lawyers, impeccably dressed and radiating an air of confidence, presented complex legal arguments, citing obscure regulations and precedents. They spoke in jargon that was difficult for the townspeople to understand, making them feel intimidated and powerless. Sarah, on the other hand, spoke in plain language, appealing to the judge's sense of fairness and common sense. She presented evidence of the dam's potential environmental damage, highlighting the impact on the river's ecosystem and the town's water supply. She brought in expert witnesses, biologists, hydrologists, and environmental scientists who testified about the devastating consequences of the dam. Elias, though not a lawyer, played a crucial role in the legal battle. He gathered historical records, old photographs, and personal testimonies from the townspeople, documenting the river's importance to Oak Haven's history and culture. He even brought in his old cobbler's tools, displaying them as a symbol of the town's enduring craftsmanship and its connection to the land. The courtroom battles were emotionally draining for everyone involved. The townspeople watched anxiously, their hopes rising and falling with each legal maneuver. Elias, despite his age, remained a pillar of strength, offering words of encouragement and reminding them of what they were fighting for. He knew that the fate of Oak Haven rested on the outcome of this legal battle. He knew that if they lost, their town, their river, their way of life would be forever changed. And he was determined to do everything in his power to prevent that from happening. He believed in the power of justice, in the importance of standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. He had mended boots for a lifetime, and now he was determined to mend his town. The legal proceedings dragged on for months, each day bringing new challenges and setbacks. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Thompson, listened patiently to both sides, carefully weighing the evidence and the arguments. The courtroom, with its high ceilings and somber atmosphere, felt like a battleground, a place where the fate of Oak Haven would be decided. Riverbend's lawyers, led by a seasoned attorney named Mr. Caldwell, were relentless in their pursuit. They argued that the dam was essential for the region's economic growth, that it would provide clean energy and create jobs. They dismissed the townspeople's concerns about the environment, claiming that the environmental impact studies had shown minimal damage. They even accused the townspeople of being selfish and short-sighted, hindering progress for their own narrow interests. "These people are clinging to the past," Mr. Caldwell declared in his closing argument, his voice booming through the courtroom. "They are afraid of change, afraid of progress, but we cannot let their fears hold us back. We must embrace the future, even if it means making some sacrifices." Sarah, though intimidated by Mr. Caldwell's experience and skill, refused to back down. She countered his arguments with passion and conviction, reminding the judge of the importance of protecting the environment and preserving the town's heritage. She presented compelling evidence of the dam's potential damage. Showing photographs of the river's pristine beauty and reading allowed the heartfelt testimonies of the townspeople. "This is not about progress versus the past," Sarah argued, her voice clear and strong. "It's about choosing between greed and sustainability, between short-term profits and long-term well-being. The people of Oak Haven are not afraid of change. They are simply asking for the right kind of change, change that benefits everyone, not just a wealthy corporation." The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Judge Thompson prepared to deliver her verdict. The townspeople held their breath, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Elias sat quietly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his eyes fixed on the judge's face. He knew that the future of Oak Haven hung in the balance. He had faith in Sarah, in the power of justice, and in the goodness of the human spirit. But he also knew that sometimes, even the best intentions were not enough. Sometimes greed and power prevailed and the innocent suffered. He could only hope that this would not be one of those times. He could only hope that Judge Thompson would see the truth, would understand the importance of protecting the river, and would rule in favor of Oak Haven. Just as Judge Thompson was about to speak, the courtroom doors swung open and a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to the entrance as a tall, imposing figure strode confidently inside. It was Governor Thorne. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The townspeople were stunned. They had heard rumors that the governor might be following the case, but they never expected him to appear in person. Mr. Harding and Mr. Caldwell exchanged nervous glances, their faces paling slightly. They knew that the governor's presence could change everything. Governor Thorne walked directly to the front of the courtroom, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. He nodded respectfully to Judge Thompson, then turned to address the room. "I apologize for the interruption, Your Honor," he said, his voice deep and resonant, "but I felt it was imperative that I be here today. This case is of great importance to the entire state, and I wanted to ensure that justice is served." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Then, he turned his attention to the representatives of Riverbend Enterprises. "I have been following this case closely," he said, his voice hardening. "And I am deeply concerned about the potential impact of this dam on the environment and on the community of Oak Haven." He turned to face the townspeople, his eyes filled with compassion. "I know that you have been through a difficult time," he said, "but I want you to know that I am here to support you. I believe in the importance of protecting our natural resources and preserving our communities, and I will do everything in my power to ensure that Oak Haven's river is protected." He then addressed Judge Thompson directly. "Your Honor," he said, "I understand that this case is before you and I respect your authority. But I urge you to consider all the evidence carefully, to weigh the potential consequences of your decision, and to rule in favor of what is right, what is just, and what is best for the people of Oak Haven." With that, Governor Thorne stepped back, allowing Judge Thompson to proceed. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with anticipation. The townspeople looked at each other in disbelief, their faces filled with hope. They knew that Governor Thorne's intervention had changed everything. They had a powerful ally on their side, someone who believed in them, someone who was willing to fight for them. And Elias, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, felt a surge of gratitude and recognition. He looked closely at the governor's face, and a flicker of memory stirred within him. He recognized those kind eyes, the lines of fatigue etched around them. He remembered the weary traveler, the broken boot, the small act of kindness. He remembered Thorn's promise to repay his generosity. And he realized, with a profound sense of awe, that the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. Judge Thompson, visibly moved by Governor Thorn's words, cleared her throat and began to speak. After careful consideration of all the evidence presented, she said, her voice firm and resolute, I have come to a decision in this case. She paused, looking directly at Mr. Caldwell and the representatives of Riverbend Enterprises. I find that the potential environmental damage caused by the proposed dam outweighs the economic benefits claimed by the corporation. Furthermore, I believe that the dam would have a devastating impact on the community of Oak Haven, disrupting their way of life and destroying their cultural heritage. She turned to face the townspeople, her eyes filled with compassion. Therefore, she declared, I am ruling in favor of the town of Oak Haven. The permit for the dam is hereby denied. A cheer erupted in the courtroom, a wave of jubilation washing over the townspeople. They hugged each other, tears streaming down their faces, their hearts filled with gratitude and relief. Elias, overcome with emotion, stood up and applauded, his eyes fixed on Governor Thorn. The governor smiled warmly, acknowledging the townspeople's gratitude. Then he stepped forward and addressed the room once more. I know that Judge Thompson's decision is a victory for Oak Haven, he said, but I want to assure you that this is not the end of the story. Riverbend Enterprises may appeal this decision, and they may try to find other ways to build their dam. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd until it rested on Elias. But I want you to know that I will not let that happen. As governor of this state, I have the authority to block this project, and I intend to use that authority to protect Oak Haven and its river. He stepped down from the podium and walked towards Elias, his hand outstretched. Elias, he said, his voice filled with warmth and gratitude, do you remember me? I was just a weary traveler back then with a broken boot and an empty pocket. You showed me kindness when I needed it most, and I have never forgotten that. Elias took Thorn's hand, his eyes shining with tears. Governor, he said, his voice trembling with emotion, I remember you. I never expected to see you again, but I am so grateful that you are here. Thorn squeezed Elias' hand tightly. I made you a promise that day, Elias, he said. I promised to repay your kindness, and today I am fulfilling that promise. I am using my authority to block this dam project, not just because it is the right thing to do for the environment and for the community, but because it is the right thing to do for you, for the man who showed me compassion when I needed it most. He turned to face the crowd, his voice ringing with authority. I am issuing an executive order, effective immediately, that permanently prohibits the construction of any dam on the Oak Haven River. This river belongs to the people of Oak Haven, and it will remain free and flowing for generations to come. The townspeople erupted in another cheer, their voices filled with joy and gratitude. They knew that Governor Thorn's intervention had saved their town, had protected their river, had preserved their way of life. And they knew that it was all thanks to the kindness of a humble cobbler who had mended a broken boot and touched the heart of a weary traveler. The celebration in Oak Haven lasted for days. The townspeople transformed the town square into a giant festival ground, with music, dancing, and food stalls filling the air with joyous sounds and delicious aromas. They hung banners and streamers, decorating everything in sight with the colors of the river, blues, greens, and silvers. They roasted a whole pig, baked dozens of pies, and brewed gallons of their famous apple cider. Elias was the guest of honor, paraded through the streets on the shoulders of his grateful neighbors. They hailed him as a hero, a savior, the man who had stood up to the corporation and inspired them to fight for their river. But Elias, ever humble and unassuming, insisted that he was no hero. I only did what was right, he said, his voice hoarse from days of speeches and celebrations. I only stood up for what I believed in. The real heroes are all of you, the people of Oak Haven, who never gave up hope, who never stopped fighting for your river. Governor Thorne stayed in Oak Haven for several days, joining in the celebrations and sharing stories with the townspeople. He visited Elias' workshop, admiring his craftsmanship and thanking him once again for his kindness. "You taught me a valuable lesson that day, Elias," Thorne said, his eyes filled with sincerity. "You taught me that even the smallest acts of kindness can have a profound impact on the world. You taught me that it is important to stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult. And you inspired me to use my power to help others, to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Before leaving Oak Haven, Thorne presented Elias with a special gift, a beautifully crafted leather-bound book, filled with photographs of the river, poems about nature, and handwritten messages of gratitude from the townspeople. "This is a reminder of what we accomplished together," Thorne said, handing Elias the book. "A reminder of the power of community, the importance of perseverance, and the enduring strength of the human spirit." As Thorne departed, the townspeople lined the streets, waving and cheering, their hearts filled with gratitude and respect. They knew that they would never forget his visit, and they would never forget the day that their town was saved. And Elias, standing in the doorway of his workshop, watched Thorne disappear down the road, his heart filled with a sense of peace and satisfaction. He had played a small part in a great victory, and he had made a difference in the world. He had mended a broken boot, and in doing so, he had helped to mend a broken community. He had shown kindness to a weary traveler, and in return, he had received the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that he had made the world a better place. And that, he knew, was a reward worth more than any amount of money or fame. It was the reward of a life well lived, a life dedicated to craftsmanship, community, and compassion. Years passed. Elias continued to mend shoes in his small workshop, his hands still nimble, his heart still full of gratitude. The leather-bound book, a gift from Governor Thorne, held a place of honor on his workbench, a constant reminder of the day Oak Haven was saved. The town prospered, its river flowing freely, its people living in peace and harmony. The children splashed and played along the riverbanks, fishermen cast their lines, and lovers strolled hand in hand along its grassy edges, just as they always had. The river was the heart of Oak Haven, and it continued to nourish and sustain the community, providing water, power, and beauty for generations to come. One sunny afternoon, Elias sat outside his workshop, watching the river flow by. The sunlight danced on the water, creating shimmering patterns of light and shadow. He closed his eyes, listening to the gentle sounds of the river, the soft murmur of the water, the rustling of the leaves in the trees, the chirping of the birds in the sky. He thought about Governor Thorne, wondering where he was and what he was doing. He hoped that he was well, that he was happy, and that he was still using his power to help others. He knew that Thorne's kindness had saved Oak Haven, but he also knew that it was just one small act in a lifetime of good deeds. He thought about the townspeople, his friends and neighbors, who had stood together in the face of adversity and fought for what they believed in. He was proud to be a part of their community, proud to call Oak Haven his home. He thought about the broken boot, the weary traveler, the small act of kindness that had changed everything. He realized that it was not just the act itself that mattered, but the intention behind it, the compassion and empathy that had motivated him to help a stranger in need. He opened his eyes, gazing at the river, its waters sparkling in the sunlight. He knew that the river would continue to flow year after year, decade after decade, century after century. And he knew that as long as the river flowed, Oak Haven would thrive. And he knew that as long as people continued to show kindness and compassion to one another, the world would be a better place. The Oak Haven River flowed, a ribbon of silver under the warm sun. It reflected the blue sky, the green trees lining its banks, and the faces of the people who lived beside it. It was a testament to the enduring power of small acts of kindness, the unwavering strength of community, and the boundless capacity of the human heart to heal and to hope. And it all started with a cobbler, a broken boot, and a simple act of compassion. The river flowed on, carrying its story to the sea.